Welcome to the CSCP certification series, Module 2, Section B. In this section, we learn about e-business, collaboration, and cybersecurity. In Lesson 4, we have e-business models. We'll also learn something called vendor managed inventory. We will learn about CPFR, legal, and also cybersecurity risk. Connectivity, visibility sharing, and legal. So this will wrap up our topic 2. That is the second of our 2 lessons on this large topic, basically. So we will also learn about the e-business, collaboration, and legal, like I said. Traditional versus electronic business supply chain. Now, this is a favorite exam source for in this table that we are looking at. It's a favorite exam topic. So it has 10 characteristics contrasting traditionally vertically integrated supply chains against agile virtual e-business supply chains, right? So the through line basically is that the traditional supply chain concentrates ownership and scale, whereas the e-business supply chain distributes risk, shares rewards, and competes on agility and brand equity rather than owned assets, basically. So this table we can go through, the list of characteristics, the 10 characteristics that are there, and how the traditional supply chain differs from the electronic business supply chain, basically, right? So ownership, of course, it is the vertical scaling in traditional supply chain. Own vertical supply chain through mergers, basically. Here in the electronic business supply chain, we own the core capabilities in a virtual supply chain, right? And competitive advantage of traditional supply chain is high market share and assets will dominate. Whereas in electronic business chain, agile firms with few assets dominate, right? So assets should be lower, but they will still be dominating on the product front. Nucleus firm in traditional supply chains, we have a retailer, a manufacturer, right? So basically industrial, right? In electronic business supply chain, the brand equity or greatest efficiency is, makes the firm as the nucleus firm, right? If you in a traditional supply chain, what makes a particular firm as a nucleus firm? It is either the retailer or the manufacturer, right? Whereas in the electronic business supply chain, it is the brand equity or the greatest efficiency, whichever company provides greatest efficiency. In terms of trading, in traditional supply chains, the best deal at the expense of other party, basically, right? So one party will get a better deal than the other. Whereas in the electronic supply chain, the risks and rewards are shared, right? That is so basically it creates a win-win situation in a electronic supply chain as opposed to a win-lose situation in a traditional supply chain. Competitors, right? So in traditional supply chains, competitors rarely interact. Whereas in electronic business supply chains, if competitors will interact if there is a mutual gain, basically, right? So again, this sharing of gains, risks, rewards, it is very inherent in the electronic business supply chain. Production, economics of scale and scope in traditional supply chain. Engineering a competitive supply chain is more important in the electronic business supply chain. In terms of collaboration, we have internal silos and costly networking in the traditional supply chain, whereas partner silos and open networking in the electronic business supply chain. Suppliers obviously are limited by buyer relationship over phone, or it's very physical, it's very manual, right, in traditional supply chains. Whereas in the business electronic supply chain, there are marketplaces and partner integration, so there are multiple suppliers at multiple levels, right? And the customer service is reactive and little feedback is used in traditional supply chains, whereas very proactive feedback, very proactive and better use of feedback. We can all think about when we shop on Amazon, we can give a feedback or write about a product, right? So that is the advantage of the electronic supply chain. The action and the response will be really, really fast, right? And then intermediaries in the traditional supply chain, they are fixed and vertically integrated. But in electronic business supply chain, they actually avoid any intermediaries unless they add value, right? There is no entity in the electronic supply chain which does not add value, right? So that is absolutely lean as compared to traditional supply chain where there are more intermediaries. There will usually be intermediaries, right? So these are the 10 top differences between the traditional and the electronic business supply chain. Now let's look into e-business considerations, right? So vision will cascade into business strategy, which becomes the e-business strategy spanning the following areas, right? There are 6 areas an e-business strategy has to address, all flowing from vision through business strategy. So note fulfillment explicitly calls out the push-pull direction decision, right? So wherein the process, where in the process do you switch from forecast driven, which is push, to order driven, which is pull fulfillment, right? So that's a callback to module one's demand management concept. Okay, so it's just referring, or it's a pointer to the module one demand management concept. Okay, now the 6 areas are sourcing, manufacturing, fulfillment. Here we talk about push and pull, and then channel management, business transformation, and collaboration, right? So if you look at this, the vision cascades into business strategy, which again transforms into e-business strategy. So dwelling a little deeper into e-business model and what are the potential costs and challenges with e-business. There are 8 challenge areas to know. So we can group them mentally. Cost items, which are reinvestment, hardware, software, transportation, handling. Then people and process items. We can group them as, what are the ones under people and process items? Implementation, change management, and accessibility. And then we have the risk items, which is reliance on outside suppliers, global localization, and system security, right? So just have these 3 mental models, group them mentally, right? Cost items, people process items, and risk items, right? So this way you will not need to memorize all these 8 areas, 8 challenge areas, right? So these are the potential costs and challenges with e-business, right? Regular investment, increased material handling and outbound transportation, obviously, hardware, software, reliance on outside suppliers, implementation and change management, global localization, system security, accessibility, and ease of use. We talk about sell-side e-commerce website. From an exam point of view, it's important to know the sell side versus the buyer side. Sell side will have one seller, many buyers, and seller controls the site, right? Like think like a manufacturer's own storefront, right? But the buyer side, there will be one buyer, many sellers. Okay, so buyer controls the site. Think like a corporate procurement portal, right? So this slide will focus on sell side, which is the more common exam scenario, right? And it will tie into everything else we have discussed, right? The site is only as good as its ERP, WMS, TMS integration behind it, right? So a sell side site is hosted and controlled by the seller. The seller's storefront facing many buyers. So product catalog and pricing. Seller controls what is shown, how it is described, and pricing and promotions. Order capture and checkout. Shopping cart we have payment processing and order confirmation. ERP and fulfillment. Obviously, orders flow straight into ERP and then warehouse management system, and of course, to the transport management system. for fulfillment. So no rekeying, right? And order status and account visibility. So buyers can self-serve order tracking, history, and account management. So any e-commerce website, you will have these 4 parts, right? Sharing data among trading partners. Now these 4 models, distributor integration, DI, quick response program, CRP, and VMI. We'll finish CRP and VMI in the next slide, but we'll form a ladder of increasing collaboration depth, right? So these 4 models will form a ladder of increasing collaboration depth, right? DI is the baseline, right? Just integrating IT systems to share data, and the customer role is very minimal, right? So if you look at it, customer role is practically nothing in distributor integration. But the supplier role is to integrate information systems to share inventory data, expertise, inventory related DI, and service related DI. Moving on, like I said, it's going to be increasingly collaborative. The next model is the quick response program, which is QRP. Here, the customer has to provide the point of sale data to the supplier and then submit the individual orders. The supplier will synchronize the supply with demand and also the forecast. These are the first 2 models. The third model is continuous replenishment. CRP is the supplier replenishment without waiting for a purchase order, driven directly by actual sales or shipment data, right? So that means that customer role is to notify the suppliers of actual daily sales or warehouse shipments. Okay, here you can say retailer. Retailer is the customer role here. Okay, so retailer has to notify the suppliers of actual daily sales and warehouse shipments. The supplier role is to replenish without receiving orders. Okay, the supplier has to prevent stockouts, reduce the inventory because inventory holding will cost a lot more, and also responsible for improving the turnover, right? Now this is the third level of collaboration with continuous replenishment. Now the fourth one, which is vendor managed inventory, VMI. Okay. Now the customer has a huge role here. That is, you can talk about a retailer actually when you say customer here, right? So VMI goes one step further. So the supplier will take over active management of customers' inventory entirely, scheduling, stocking, counting, even representing themselves at the customer's plant. Okay, the supplier will take over, right? This is here the customer only has to sell, do a joint forecast along with the supplier, okay, manage the relationship and also help with the logistics, right? So supplier will do the rest, schedule the replenishment, keep inventory records, represent the supplier at the customer's plant, and also display, store, deliver, receive stock and count the inventory, right? So basically this is like taking over one entire um, section of the retailer or the customer, right? So you can see how VMI goes beyond all the other 3 models, DI, CRP, QRP that we have seen. Make sure that this order is followed. The ladder is, first is DI, distributor integration, then QRP, and then quick response program, that is CRP, that is continuous replenishment, and finally the VMI, right? Each one is deepening the supplier responsibility and trust and taking over more and more responsibility, supplier basically. VMI and consignment combinations. Now, 2 separate dimensions can combine. Who manages the inventory, VMI, and who owns it until used, consignment. That is what a consignment means. So if it is VMI alone, then the supplier manages and replenishes the customer's inventory but ownership transfers to the customer at delivery or receipt. Beyond that, the vendor or supplier will not do much. When it is a consignment alone, right, supplier will retain the ownership of inventory until the customer actually uses or sells it, right? Our customer just holds the stock, right? Now, when we combine these two, VMI and consignment, okay, it becomes a very powerful combination. So when it is combined, the supplier takes on both a major working capital advantage for the customer. Okay, but what this requires is a very high trust and a tightly integrated relationship, right? So supplier manages both, and he owns the inventory until the consumption. The lowest risk is for the customer, but the customer and the supplier relationship should be really of deep trust, and they should also be integrated, right? Now we'll move on to collaborative planning, forecasting and replenishment, CPFR. Now CPFR is the most structured collaboration model. Okay, we have seen all the four, starting from DI to all the way till VMI, right? Now CPFR, it has 4 phases. Now each with parallel tasks for manufacturer and retailer, and also a collaboration task, a joint collaboration also. Now in this table represents that, right? We have to know these phases in order, okay, for CPFR. Strategy and planning sets up the relationship. So demand and supply management does the forecasting. Execution turns forecast into actual orders and fulfillment. And analysis closes the loop with scorecards and exception management feeding back into the next cycle, right? So if you see the table here, from an exam point of view, make sure that these 4 phases are very well understood. What are the manufacturer tasks in each phase, and what are the retailer's tasks, and what are the collaboration tasks basically, right? So in strategy and planning, the manufacturer tasks are account planning, market planning, vendor tasks, retailer tasks are vendor management and category management, and both of them will collaborate, okay, to develop a joint business plan. In demand and supply phase, or demand and supply management, the manufacturer has to do market data analysis and demand planning. The retailer has to do point of service forecasting and replenishment planning. Both of them will collaborate to do the sales forecasting, order planning and forecasting. In the execution phase, the manufacturer has to do production and supply planning, logistics and distribution. Similarly, the retailer should do buying and rebuying, logistics and distribution. And both of them have to collaborate to do order generation and order fulfillment. Finally, in the analysis phase, execution monitoring and customer scorecard are done by the manufacturer. Store execution and supplier scorecard are worked by the retailer. Now both of these combine or collaborate to do exception management and performance assessment. So CPFR phases and collaboration tasks are very important. So it's a very simple table. So go through this and ensure that you remember is in the same order. Let's talk about legal and privacy requirements. Now there are 2 sides on this slide if you look at it. On the left side, we have the general legal privacy risk landscape, which includes trade disruptions, political or intellectual property risk, data privacy risk, and cybersecurity, several of which are insurable, right? Most of these are insurable. On the right hand side, we have GDPR's 6 individual rights, which are highly testable. So basically, the exam loves these on the right side, GDPR rights basically. So this describes that individuals have the rights to be informed how their data is used. They have the right to access their personal data. They also have the right to correct errors in their data. They can also request that their data be forgotten, which means erased. They can also get a copy of their data. And finally, they can opt out from their data being captured at all, right? So these are the 6 individual rights under EU's GDPR. On the left hand side, let me just go a little bit deeper into the key risk areas. Like I mentioned, most of these or all of these are almost insurable. So the trade disruptions that happen can be insured via disruption insurance. In a recent blockade where a major canal, Panama Canal, was blocked by a particular ship, that caused a major trade disruptions. And I'm hoping that the uh, the shipping company which owns the vessel had disruption insurance, right? And also political risk, which is IP expropriation, intellectual property. So loss of intellectual property, this is also insurable. Data privacy risk, which is managed by PII policies and controls, this is also insurable. And finally, cybersecurity, which can be insured via cyber insurance. We will now look into 2 frameworks for cybersecurity. NIST's cybersecurity framework has 3 components. Basically, profile, tiers, which is maturity, and also the core. Under profile, we find your organization's specific roadmap, comparing current as is and target status to be status. Tiers, which is your maturity level, from partial, which is the least mature, to adaptive, which is the most mature. And then we have the core, that is the 5 functions every cybersecurity program needs, which is identity, protect, detect, respond, and recover. This 5 function core list is a very important one from an exam point of view. Essentially, the life cycle of managing a particular cyber risk, right? So NIST framework is 3 tier here, 3 parts are there, right? Profile, tiers, which is maturity, and core. The MITRE, ATT, and CK framework. So it's a free, globally accessible knowledge base of real-world adversary tactics, techniques, and procedures, and it is maintained by this org called MITRE, and it serves as a common language for cybersecurity professionals to understand the attacker behavior, to improve threat detection, and strengthen the defenses. Now, you don't need to memorize all these 14 stages of verbation, but we have to recognize the shape. Basically, it starts with the attacker scoping out the target. Okay. And then after scoping out the target, he moves through getting in and taking hold. Okay. And then operating inside. And then it ends with damage. So these are the stages that you have to remember. Under these stages, you'll have a lot of these. For example, scoping out the target means reconnaissance, resource development, and moving through getting in and taking hold means like initial access, execution, persistence, and privilege escalation, defense evasion, credential access, all this. Then operating inside will involve discovery, lateral movement, collection, command and control. Finally, like we said, when the damage happens, the attacker would have exfiltrated or infiltrated, and also there would be a huge impact, right? So NIST, that is the previous framework that we spoke about, it tells you how to build a defense program. Whereas this framework, MITRE, ATT, and CK, tells you what stages an actual attack goes through. Okay, They are complementary. They are not competing frameworks, but they are complementary frameworks. It is important to know and understand how each of these frameworks work, basically. That brings us to the end of topic 2. We have learned about technology applications, architecture, e-business, collaboration, and risk. Please try to answer the quick questions down below in your comments. Please don't forget to like and share and subscribe to this channel.